The Jayden Daniels breakout is official. He has arrived, Shawn. It didn't really take 3 weeks. We were excited through those opening 2 weeks, but week 3, we see him go out against the Cincinnati Bengals on the road and have a phenomenal performance that we're going to talk about on the show today. I have a number of different stats, Shawn, to dive into, but I thought that game in general was a lot of fun. That Bengals Commanders game is the first game since 1940 with no turnovers or punts. That was mentioned on the ESPN broadcast. So I think that's a long time, Shawn, when you go like 84 years and you're able to do something. The other part of that is this Commanders offense with the commander, Jayden Daniels, at the helm, have scored on, you might know this, Shawn. Guess how many? How many straight possessions have the Commanders scored on in week 2 and week 3?
13.
Oh, very close. 14. I think that's pretty good stuff. So he goes 293 yards. He's a 91.3% completion rate. 3 total touchdowns, including a deep touchdown down the sideline to Terry McLaurin to kind of seal the deal. I did see with the next-gen stats, Shawn, that was the most improbable completion for the Commanders since those stats began in 2016. It also had a 10.3% completion probability, making it the most improbable touchdown off the season so far. Obviously, there's only 3 weeks gone at that point, but I watched this game, Shawn, when I woke up Tuesday morning my time. Didn't stay up overnight. Let me tell you, I was pretty hyped when I was having my breakfast cereal on a Tuesday morning watching this performance. I'm sure you were in the same boat in terms of, how things came along here. Him rushing the ball, he has 39 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. But just you look at the other, a lot, not just rookie quarterbacks around the league, and we can look at the Cincinnati defense and, what issues they may have. But in terms of making decisions and, zipping the ball in there, there's no oh, maybe he's making the decision and the ball has been rifled in there. And it was just for a player in his 3rd game, this was incredibly impressive.
Well, I think back to the RotoViz rookie guide time period. I think back to having the college football experts on OT in the spring when we were grilling Travis May on Jayden Daniels, and everything is glowing.
Where's the flaws?
Well, I mean, we did get him to say that Jayden Daniels is a version of Lamar Jackson who can also throw the ball. Now, we know that Lamar Jackson can beat defenses vertically, in part because the threat of the run is so significant. So, I mean, some part of that is only half serious, because you look at Lamar Jackson and the weaknesses that he has as a passer are real, and they're there, and they do sometimes hurt the Ravens, but he is this unique threat that, in terms of uniqueness and the way that it really changes or affects what defenses do, probably Josh Allen is the only similar type of player. Not that they're having the same types of stress that they cause for the defense, but that it's so unique and it's so dramatic what they do to the opposing side. Jayden Daniels through 3 weeks looks exactly as advertised, in that he looks so similar to Lamar Jackson as a runner. Again, with the caveat that, no one is going to be Lamar Jackson, but Jayden Daniels is the next closest thing. There's a huge gap, I think, between him and someone like a Justin Fields, between him and, even what guys like Josh Allen certainly and Jalen Hurts do. To be able to have that, and then to also look like one of the best passers in the NFL instantly. Colm, this is the game where he goes 21 for 23. Now, a lot of those passes, again, are very quick release, horizontal passes, to the backs, although it wasn't as much in this game. We only get the 3 targets to Eckler and Brian Robinson, but we know a lot of these passes are short. You get the 5 targets for Ertz, which, a little bit annoying. We'd love to see Ben Sinnott out there. Ertz seems like a guy who, is executing and yet probably hurts this offense. But you get the big play from Luke McCaffrey. He almost gets the ball out there for a touchdown. But this game here, where you do unlock Terry McLaurin, you get the 6 targets, you get that long touchdown, you have some other opportunities in there as well.
One of those incompletions as well, Shawn, watching the footage back, is pretty much it's going to be a wide open touchdown if he, sees the play. It's just one that he probably wants to have back, but it's very hard to complain when you have 2 incompletions in the entire game. But you're mentioning the quick passes and getting it out there quick. The actual touchdown to Terry McLaurin is a play where it's it's an all-out blitz, man-to-man coverage, and you have a situation there where it's basically Terry McLaurin has to beat his man. He does a double move. I did watch some comments from Terry McLaurin after the game saying that the way it was set up, he had to improvise that double move rather than just do a straight go right. But he has a defensive lineman unblocked coming right in his face, and I know the ball still comes out quick because he's airing it out to get it down to that point, but the actual stand there and know that you're going to get absolutely crushed and to deliver that ball as a rookie, I think a lot of other quarterbacks, whether rookie or not, are going to try and scramble out of that situation, or going to try and get away, maybe run. We're seeing a lot of quarterbacks at the minute, we're even seeing CJ Stroud do it, but running back ways, potentially going to get sacked for longer distances. You see that quite a bit with some of the rookie players. But in your third game in a high pressure situation like that, to stand there, take the hit, and deliver the ball, I understand that some of them are easy completions, but that one obviously he's standing in there and delivering.
And you think back to, again, prospect season and the analysis that we're doing on all of these. And one of the things that was a lot of fun, working through what we had in the RotoViz rookie guide and then working through the content on the site, where I had so much fun, Colm, doing the Rookie 101 series, where it made the argument for Caleb Williams, for Jayden Daniels, for Malik Neighbors, for Marvin Harrison, for Brock Bowers. And the interesting thing through that process was how separated in his final season, which is noteworthy because Jayden Daniels was in college for a long time. That's apples and oranges with guys like Caleb Williams and Drake May. In his final season, there was no one remotely comparable. And when you're thinking through that, you're like, yeah, but he has Malik Neighbors and he has Brian Thomas, and you should look pretty good. The flip side of that is that the numbers were so extraordinary that you're like, yeah, I mean, they should be good, but they are. And you'd be hard pressed to do anything more than this because the numbers are basically perfect. We're seeing that now with Daniels. And the other thing I would note, which I don't think he was given credit for through the process, was just how good he was all the way back as a freshman in college when he's dealing with Herm Edwards, he's dealing with Arizona State, those types of things. Now, he did have some struggles in between, but he was instantly a fantastic player at the college level. You look at what he's doing now, and you think about the way some of these things are being couched. The commentary team made the point that they're running a college offense and that helps them. And so you do
the Bengals made that comment during the week. The Bengals defensive backs, that kind of came back to burn them. I think the TV commentators are going to change their tune pretty quick. And we've seen a lot of innovations from college be brought into the NFL in terms of the passing game. Like it's not all bad. So if you can run that successfully, that's a lot better than some of these offenses we're seeing in the NFL at the minute.
Yeah, so these NFL teams, and this was one of the sort of fun things that Ben and I talked about on Sunday night, but you have so many mixed incentives in that you're trying to find the type of quarterback who can run a certain type of offense. And one of the things that the Panthers discussed in the first month last season with Bryce Young was that they felt like one of the reasons he was struggling was that they were asking him to do so much, but they were asking him to do that in part because he could handle it. He was so great at processing information. It's always difficult to self-evaluate as well as build an offense, build a play calling sheet, understand what the opponent is doing. Football is asking the coaching staffs to take in a phenomenal amount of information, work through that, draw the right conclusions, and then proactively go forward and try and create solutions. It's a very interesting cognitive challenge in that there's just so much going on, but then we also approach all of these things with our own biases, and that's something that's inevitable, right? You can't approach the world without having a perspective. And yet, when you think through how teams are trying to find these fits, and you think through some of the criticism of Cliff Kingsbury, for example, I mean, he's not going to come out and say this, but if you were able to get him in an honest moment right now and ask him, well, why is this working with the Commanders? Why did it not work with Kyler Murray? And my thought, which again comes from some of my own point of view and biases and all that, is that Jayden Daniels is so much. I mean, Jayden Daniels is as much better than Kyler Murray as Kyler Murray is than Deshaun Watson, right? You're talking
I thought
about.
you were going to say, Shawn, that Jayden Daniels can see over the offensive line.
Well, that does help, right? But again, the decision making, the quickness of the release, the accuracy, the ball placement. I mean, Jayden Daniels is just
like you're talking about the ball placement,
literally and figuratively, like you just mentioned, above Kyler Murray.
Those passes that I was mentioning in terms of the completions and how quick they come out, there wasn't many of them where the player catching the ball was having to like readjust his body, or like he was hitting them right in stride or right in the numbers. And I thought that was another thing that really stood out, was just how accurate those passes were. The other thing, Shawn, that I want to mention, because we've kind of hit on him for the last season and opening 2 weeks, was I thought Austin Eckler, although he only had 3 carries in this, there was some explosiveness back for him. He had a long kickoff return in this one, goes 3 for 35 and a touchdown from him. So I think he looked better. And I just wanted to mention that because we usually go the opposite direction. You mentioned Zach Ertz. I actually think Ertz looks a lot better now than he did 12 months ago with the Cardinals, but we would still rather see Ben Sinnott out there. We did have him lose a fumble in this one. That was Zach Ertz. But flip side now, to look at the Bengals, I mentioned, I believe it was after the week 2 show, that they had the perfect get right spot against this Commanders defense. And that's one of the other things that I think is going to be great for Jayden Daniels from a fantasy perspective this year, is he's going to have to put up, 20, 25, maybe even 30 plus points to get wins in these games. They're now 2-1 on the season, but the Bengals now are 0-3. They get a chance to face this Commanders defense, which, isn't very good. But Burrow goes 29 to 38, 324 yards, 3 touchdowns. I think his best game in quite some time. We get Jamar Chase 6 for 118 and 2 touchdowns on 7 receptions. I think across the board, there's some okay numbers, but nothing huge. But we get Yoshivas in the end zone again, 7 targets, 5 for 52. Gesicki continues to be worked into the offense. T. Higgins disappointing, 6 targets, 3 receptions, 39 yards. The running backs get a combined 9 targets for 7 receptions. Overall, the passing game, looks good here. I think a good bit of that's probably down to the Washington Commanders, but did the Bengals show you enough here to think that maybe from a fantasy perspective, they can deliver for the rest of the season? The difficult part for them now, 0-3 on the season, 0-2 at home. They are in a pretty big hole when it comes to anyway looking at, advanced seeding for the playoffs. You're looking at a wild card situation now to be pushing yourselves towards that. But 0-3 to kick things off is pretty brutal. What was your thoughts overall on the Bengals? We did have the running back split it again with Zach Moss, 12 carries, Chase Brown, 7 carries, with Brown getting 62 yards on those 2. Moss's 58 and a touchdown. Moss does get the 5 receptions versus Chase's 2 receptions. So the running back's still pretty split. I think Moss is doing pretty good on some of his carries. I think overall Brown is the better running back, so we may see it lean as the season goes on towards him like we thought it would. The Bengals, fixed for fantasy, will not worry about for reality. Are we just seeing what happens when you face a porous defense?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both. We've gotten too much positive from Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase over the years to think that a game like this is fluky. And yet, I mean, I go back to this running back situation where take out Jonathan Taylor, take out Breece Hall, take out what we've seen from Saquon Barkley, take out Kyron Williams. I'm sure there's a back or two in there that I'm missing or who also deserves to be at least mentioned. And you can't really even make this comment because of how little they've used Chase Brown. But are there other backs who've looked better than Chase Brown? Every time Chase Brown touched the ball in this game, it looked like he was going to go for a 60-yard touchdown. Now, obviously, the long was 16, but he's slicing through as though the Commanders' defense isn't even there. Now, one of the things is the Commanders' defense basically isn't there. Right? I mean, that's how bad this opponent is. You just lost to a team that has, and is probably going to go down as having a historically bad defense. Right now, you didn't have to punt. Well, I mean, fantastic, right? Your team is still embarrassing, and part of the embarrassing element of it is that you're using Zach Moss when you have Chase Brown. I just think the coaching staff here is so poor. You think about the hire of Brian Callahan for the Titans. I thought that was the most surprising of all of the offseason hires outside of, I mean, retreads are kind of a different category altogether. But, I mean, these two coaching staffs that were an embarrassment last season, and then you get someone who is hired as the head coach, 0-6, and look absolutely awful. I think that has to concern you, right? I mean, if you're Joe Burrow, if you're Jamar Chase, I mean, it's great that Jamar Chase was able to get behind a really terrible defense for some long touchdowns. I'm sure his teammates would still preferred that he had practiced some, right? I still have a lot of frustration and disdain for what we're getting from the Cincinnati Bengals, but it is exciting to see those long plays. Colm, I don't know if you had any leagues where you needed a big Jamar Chase game. I was going through.
I had a home league, Shawn, which I really enjoyed as well for the Daniels side, Superflex, and we're going to talk about the Bills in a minute. But I had a Jayden Daniels, Josh Allen team that was, in need of some points, which pulled me over the line, which was a lot of fun. So that was probably the biggest swing that I had on Monday Night Football with the two games happening. But yeah, mainly Jayden Daniels, not as much from the other sides outside of those best ball points will all accumulate as the season goes on for those Chase teams. So that was nice.
Yeah. I was excited when I went back through and looked. Ben and I had a main event team where the team looks really good. I mean, really good. One of those teams where you hit on most of your better selections kind of all on one unit, which, I mean, those are the teams that have a chance not only to win your league. I mean, hopefully you're going to have a lot of teams in position to potentially win your league, but also maybe eventually compete for the 1 million. The problem there is that the first round pick, we actually worked it all the way down. And I think with 1 second, we decided to go with Jamar Chase over Justin Jefferson, in part because Jamar Chase is going to be catching passes from Joe Burrow. Through 2 weeks, that looked like a catastrophically bad decision. In week 3, if we had had Justin Jefferson score instead of Jamar Chase's, we would have lost. We came down and I believe won 158 to 154, something like that, with Chase going directly against Josh Allen. So for Chase to come out in this game on Monday night, the final game, hold off the big Josh Allen score, that was very exciting just from a fantasy football perspective, right? When we talk about the games, what it means for fantasy, but like directly in fantasy, that was fun for me. I know it was fun for numerous listeners who had a Chase team out there. But I think that going forward, one of the things that you like to see over the next month, the Bengals have a neutral opposing schedule for receivers. That is actually, I think, pretty favorable for the Cincinnati Bengals. You look at this game, you look at what Chase did, you think about how he's ramping into the season. You think about how dynamic the Minnesota Vikings defense has been and some of the injuries that the Vikings have had, even, Darnold getting nicked up for a moment in that game the other night. I guess, Colm, and this is probably the question that I'll put to you as the big takeaway from this game. I think after watching the performance here, even with all of the negatives that still come with it for the Bengals, I would prefer to have Ja'Marr Chase over Justin Jefferson rest of season, especially when I'm thinking about upside. Everything with Justin Jefferson right now, pretty controversial in that Minnesota Vikings offense. Room for, I think, a lot of enthusiasm, but still, I think we have to wait and see. One of the elements that is going to come into play is that it does look like the Bengals will be in shootouts, and it does look like the Vikings may not be. Now, those are the types of things that can change very quickly, but I think you have to like what the game contexts are likely to be for Cincinnati as we go forward.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting one to look at, and I think it's pretty close. If you had asked me that question, I probably still was leaning Chase even in those late drafts. But you have a situation where Darnold is doing so much better than I think even his biggest supporters would have imagined he would have done at this particular point. Like we talked about this a little bit with the Packers versus the Titans on the Monday recap show, where is the Packers defense as good as they looked in that game? I would imagine that is not the case. They're probably closer to the middle. The Texans had a lot of issues in the game against the Vikings. They had a lot of false starts and issues like that. Was that down to their concern over the Vikings defensive front? Possibly. But you have a situation where they were completely overwhelmed. Everything was wrong. Was that down to the game plan? Was that a 1 week situation? I'm sure we'll see CJ Stroud and the Texans bounce back. And then again, we'll see what happens. Like, for example, if Jordan Love is healthy this week for the Packers and they face off against the Vikings, how does the Vikings defense hold up in that situation? So the overall game script and scenarios like that could change dramatically, after what we've just seen it from 3 weeks. So I'm not 100% sure yet, just in terms of the Vikings game scripts. The other part that's hard to be convinced by is, do we see Sam Darnold continue to have these very efficient, 3 to 4 touchdown games, on limited passes and hyper efficient play? That may regress towards the mean as well. I hope it doesn't, because it would be an awesome, kind of comeback story from somebody who's bounced around the league a bit. And we've seen that in recent times from the likes of Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield. We've seen it from a number of different guys. Last year, we've seen Joe Flacco when he had to come off the bench for the Browns to, have that kind of comeback glory as well. So I think in general, the situation that's happening with Justin Jefferson at the minute and that offense is quite favorable. Now, when we get back Hawkinson, when we get back Addison, as we've talked about on the show, that might actually help him as well in terms of coverage, because they are trying to they kind of wiped him out of that complete second half of the game this week in week 3.
He dropped a couple of passes that would have.
He also did that, yeah. That would have changed the stat line dramatically. But what I'm seeing is, like, with Sam Darnold, the fear would have been short passes, like how spread out will this offense be? But they're getting him down the field. In week 2, we've seen basically the entire field for a touchdown. But I still would be on the Justin Jefferson side of that. I do think that we're bound to see T. Higgins become more of a part of this offense, and that's a threat obviously to some of those Ja'Marr Chase points and targets as well. But both, if you have them, both very exciting players to have on your roster and your starting lineups.
One thing you could do, I think, after these games is that if you have some other needs and you want to pull a 2-for-1, I think you could move either or both of them. I mean, you probably don't have both on the same team, but you can move them. The schedule for Justin Jefferson over the next, I believe, 5 weeks is fantastic. But for both players, the schedule over the last third of the season is very, very negative. That doesn't mean those guys are going to get stopped. I don't want to overstate what the schedule means, especially because you can have schedule and then you can have game script separate from that. Even though the way our streamer does it. It's going to incorporate multiple types of elements for you there. In terms of the positives and negatives, you mentioned the long touchdowns for Justin Jefferson. He brings that. It's one of the things where over the last couple of years, he's been tackled at the one so often. You're thinking that if he starts to get in on some of those, he can have a truly epic season. There's a big difference between Sam Darnold throwing those passes and a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson, but we've already seen how the vertical passing can give you the big scores. It can feel like the pie is going to be absolutely huge, but you remove that score, which can easily happen in games. You think about what Calvin Ridley has done over the 3 weeks with bust, boom, bust. Think about how the Colts have really struggled when they didn't have those several boom plays. Darnold, a different story, but I think that we're going to have teams come up with a better game plan for what they are doing. I think you have to have a little bit of, maintain some skepticism for Darnold. The flip side with Ja'Marr Chase, you mentioned that T. Higgins is going to be more involved, but it was a 7-6 target split in this particular game. One of the things with Ja'Marr Chase, you can look at it as either a positive or a negative, that he only gets the 7 targets and has the big game here. When you have 38 passes, you'd actually like to have more than the 7 targets for Ja'Marr Chase. I would expect him to get more involved as the season goes through. You have the 7 targets for Andre Iosivas. You have Gesicki involved again. You even have Eric All involved again. So a lot of targets going to the tight ends. You, as you mentioned, 9 passes to the backs. This was a very evenly split game plan. Again, that can be a positive or negative. If you're thinking this is where Ja'Marr Chase is going to be from a target share perspective, it's actually a big risk because you're not going to execute these big plays every game. But if he makes a jump, starts to be more involved, then the upside for him pretty off the charts. It's kind of fun to think
just on Chase is if you look at his targets through 3 weeks have been 6, 5, and 7. We used to rant about CeeDee Lamb and his usage for the Dallas Cowboys, and you should be in the double-digit range in every single game, no matter what. Like they've lost those 3 games. They need to come up with some better ideas than 5 and 6 and 7 targets for one of the best wide receivers in the NFL.
I agree, 100%, 100%. Colm, another team that needs to come up with some better solutions is the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, the Jaguars, Shawn. Can we say that the Jaguars are broken? Is that what we think? We have Trevor Lawrence, who certainly looks broken, 21 of 38, and that's 178 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 4 sacks for 36 yards in this game. They're struggling, and unless it's big plays, there's not a lot of consistency throughout the entire offense. We get 10 targets to Christian Kirk for 8 for 79. We get 9 to Brian Thomas, 5 for 48. And then, like Gabe Davis, we get 6 targets, 2 receptions for 18 yards. Travis Etienne gets the 6, 4 receptions for 17 yards. 5 targets for Brenton Strange. Obviously, we have Evan Ingram still out, but we have, Luke Farrell gets 2 targets. Dearness Johnson gets a target. Duvernay gets a target. Josiah DeGuara gets 1 target. Obviously, not ideal, Shawn. The Jaguars are in a situation as well, 0-3, that it kind of looks like it's going to be a pretty tough road back for them. They do have close losses in the other 2 games. They lose on a buzzer beater field goal to the Dolphins in week 1, where it looked like they were in control of that game. So they lose that one 20-17. They lose to the Browns in week 2, 18-13, where they struggle a lot. And then we get them versus the Bills this week, and they just get demolished. There is part of me this week that is willing to maybe give them some credit in terms of, not credit, but an allowance. They go into this one and they are just, the doors are blowing off. In the second quarter, it's 24-3. They're in big trouble, and there's really not a lot of a way back on the road in this situation. But I did see, I believe in his last 8 starts now, Trevor Lawrence is 0-8. I may have pulled that stat and it may be incorrect, But the team is really struggling. They do again Mac Jones to finish off the game here. He goes 5 of 8, but does lose 1 fumble in that kind of series and time that he's on. He just has 22 passing yards, 1 sack for 17 yards lost. Do we want to talk about the Jaguars, or do we just want to go and talk here about the Bills and what they were able to achieve in this game?
Well, the Jaguars have a lot of fantasy relevant players, so what they do does matter. Trevor Lawrence, I think, was a difficult selection this offseason because the QB position appeared to be so deep. And I say appeared, it kind of depends on what you think is going to happen with Caleb Williams, whether or not everyone more or less has a QB1, because even though there have been disappointments, we've gotten in a low scoring environment before things picked up quite a bit there on Monday night, which helped out a lot. You get the Bills, the Bengals, and the Commanders all scoring a bunch of points, and those 3 QBs adding a ton to that QB column. But you think through now, and you have the Jordan Love injury, but certainly that seems positive. You have Kyler Murray not playing that well in reality, but certainly doing good things for fantasy. You have Dak Prescott as your prototypical garbage time QB. You're getting the scrambling from someone like a Lamar Jackson. The 2 guys who to this point have been really disappointing, and I think controversial in terms of what is going to happen now. There's still plenty of reason to believe in them, but it's been the elite pocket passers. It's been Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud who are really hurting their managers. We hope that they get it going, in part because their receiving weapons are also a lot of fun. We want to see the scoreboard light up with all of those players. But more or less, I think this element where everybody gets a QB1, especially within the context of how all the teams are scoring, has been more or less true. So you think about a Trevor Lawrence, and I think about him for the Apex Experts League, for example, where I picked him at the very end of the draft as my second quarterback behind Jordan Love. So I've had to play him now because of the Love injury. And with his cataclysmic effort last night, that team fell from the ranks of the unbeaten, which you're always disappointed about, but you're glad that maybe you got a little margin the first couple of weeks. I'm now pretty desperate for Jordan Love to come back. It doesn't feel like Trevor Lawrence is even playable ahead of guys you can simply pick up off the waiver wire. Lawrence is one of those, Colm, where it's been a little bit difficult for me to figure out what the direction should be. Because when you go through, you look at the second half of last season and his fantasy scoring was very good. And that's what matters, right? Where are the fantasy points? You look at some of the advanced data in the SIS database, some things you can find on our site, some additional things as well. And his season last year was better than my impression of it from having watched them play all of their games. And so anytime you go through and those 2 things don't sync up, one of the things about watching every game every week is that it's still very helpful to work through all of the advanced stats. That really rounds out your perception, your understanding. It deepens it. It helps fill the holes. But there aren't very many situations where the numbers give you a completely different look than simply what you saw when you're watching the game, because the numbers are essentially transcribing the game in a different way for you, right? Trevor Lawrence is one of these guys where ever since he joined the NFL, and he's been in some situations that weren't great. You think about the rookie season there with Urban Meyer, but he's been very disappointing in that he makes the decisions quickly. He has a big arm, but that is balanced by the fact that what he's been asked to do by both coaching staffs doesn't really make sense from the perspective of this is how we're going to consistently move the ball and score points, right? We're going to have successful drives, we're going to sustain drives, and then we're going to score. So that part is tough. But then as part of that, even though he gets the ball out quickly and has that cannon, the accuracy for someone who's immediately releasing the ball doesn't seem to be there in the way that it's been just instantly, for example, for a Jayden Daniels. Again, in many cases, those guys are being asked to throw different types of passes. But when you're throwing fast, but you're throwing inaccurately, and in many cases, the read itself doesn't seem to be right. Again, from the context of how do you sustain drives? How do you go and score points? If a lot of these quick release passes, even the ones that are down the field, don't make sense, don't work, aren't completed, lead to punts, get your team blown out, as has been the case in many different contexts throughout his career, you kind of wonder, and I don't think that this is even remotely in the conversation for the Jaguars, but this is a franchise that needs a total reboot at this point. As you mentioned, they've lost a huge number of games in a row. They don't have a coaching staff that has any answers. They're not good on offense. They are now a train wreck on defense, which part of what happened in this game is that they were overmatched by the Bills and then had a bunch of injuries, both coming in, I believe, and during the game. And so then when you're playing with, basically like a minor league defense, you're not going to have any chance to stop what Josh Allen is currently doing if you don't have the requisite number of legitimate NFL defenders. It's just going to be a bloodbath like we saw on Monday Night Football. Some of those things you can't control. Just like a fantasy manager, you're sitting there where you're like, I've got 4 stars on the bench injured. I don't like my chances in this game. That's what the Jaguars were dealing with. At the same time, when you have Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis, I mean, obviously they would love to have Evan Ingram there as well, but you should have some answers. They scored 10 points in this game. As you mentioned, they have to go to Mac Jones to kind of preserve some of their players, where maybe otherwise you do get some garbage time like we've gotten from the Cowboys. But Colm, this is a team where, and I think that there were some positive things for fantasy managers. If you have Christian Kirk, you're very excited that he had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 79 yards. If you have a lot of Brian Thomas, you're again, not over the moon, but to have him be very involved, to show a little bit of run after the catch, to show some feistiness at the contact point. Those are all things that we had some questions about from the perspective of so much of his production last year with LSU was simply, okay, well, you've got Jayden Daniels to deal with and you've got Malik Neighbors to deal with, and I'm one of the fastest people on earth, especially for my size. I'm just going to run down the field. There's nothing you can do. Now in the NFL, there are things people can do. You want to see some variety to his game. I think that we're seeing that. So there are definitely some positives, but having those things manifest in a league-winning type of way, you're going to go into week 4 not knowing if you can start any of your borderline Jaguars, and that is a problem because through 3 weeks, you'd like to have picked up enough information that you can now start to make pretty strong start-sit decisions. And if you have some of these guys, the thing that we really would like is to simply know one way or the other at this point so we can start maximizing how our roster is built.
Yeah. The other thing, I don't know if you mentioned about the organization, maybe needing a reboot. I do think if things continue the way they are, I think there's a good chance that we'll see Doug Peterson be the first coach out the door in 2024. There is obviously still positives there for Lawrence. He is just 24 years old, but the situation he came into with Urban Meyer, I do think Peterson really did help step out of that. But it feels like at the moment the offense in general is going nowhere. But they are going to be playing from behind, I would imagine, in these games. And the players that you mentioned in particular, Thomas and Christian Kirk, I think are going to be viable, flex plays. But you start to get into Gabe Davis. I know a lot of his managers from last year will be well used to the up and down experience of having Gabe Davis on your roster, but we're going to see what happens moving forward there. We'll see when Evan Ingram comes back as well. That'll be another dynamic. Shawn, the Bills, let's give them some credit. They were the ones that put the points up. Josh Allen, 23 of 30, 263, 4 touchdowns, has 44 yards on the ground, 6 carries. Cook, 11 for 39, a touchdown on the ground. He does have 4 for 48 on 5 targets in the air. He's really looked pretty good as a receiver.
Dalton Kincaid drop on what would have been a second touchdown.
Yeah,
which
that was the only target not complete.
Yeah. I don't know. James Cook is tricky, right? We liked him at his price.
I think if you have him, you have to be excited in terms of what he's been able to do through 3 weeks.
I think you have to be excited. I think you have to be a little bit nervous that, I mean, not nervous probably, because anytime you're having these blowouts, it's likely that your back has scored before they try and bring in the other guys. But this is a situation where he only outcarries the combination of Ray Davis and Ty Johnson 11 to 10. So the 21 main running back carries there. He doesn't flourish as a back. And this big drop that he had in the receiving game, that's been a constant for him. These are some of the things that made him a good player, but not a star at Georgia. And I think he's going to be a good player, but not a star for the Bills. If this offense has moved so far in a different direction under Brady, and it appears to have, right? So I don't think that's that much in question right now. He's going to pay off his price, whether or not he significantly beats it. Now, you said if you have him, I think you're going to be excited. Anytime that you draft it back in that range, round 3 to round 7, people talk about how it's different this year. It definitely was different. That's one of the reasons why we were drafting some backs in that range. You think about Kenneth Walker, you think about James Conner, you think about Aaron Jones. There were names in that range that you could definitely select and feel excited about. Even once you do that, if they are hitting, then it's a massive sigh of relief, right? Because there is still a risk there. And you think about guys like Rachaad White, you think about the direction that I believe we're going with Josh Jacobs, you think about players getting injured. Yeah, you've got to be excited. I think you'd be even more excited if James Cook were just actually a little bit better.
The one thing I would highlight on that is in terms of, the splits for the running backs, Ray Davis did 4 of those carries, in terms of the overall box score. So it was 11-3 prior to the score being 37-10 for the Buffalo Bills. So I understand the split, but I think that it probably can be skewed a little bit more positive towards Cook. The other part is we had this conversation with Etienne last year where they were giving him a lot of targets, 20 carries a game, not giving him the targets, not using him the way we want to be. If Cook gets 11 carries in this, if the game's closer, he's probably getting up to the 15 carry mark. But I think it's positive for him to get those 5 targets, even though you're mentioning that one of them was a drop for a potential touchdown. But the use in terms of the 16 total looks, 15 total touches, I think is positive in terms of him being the joint second highest target in the offense. He has 5 targets. Kincaid has the 5 targets. Shakir with the 6 targets.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when you think about the fact that Keon Coleman scored a touchdown but only drew one target,
yeah.
Curtis Samuel, again, not very involved. You've got guys like Mac Hollins, MVS, Dawson Knox drawing some targets.
The case was for Dalton Kincaid that there was nobody else there. There's nobody else. They are the names. Outside of Keon Coleman, let's give him credit. He's a rookie, high draft capital. The rest of the names there are really like Mac Hollins and MVS. Curtis Samuel, somebody who I did like, but is not going to have a big role this season. Like there's targets here going to players who don't, we talk about players shouldn't be getting targets. They shouldn't be getting targets. Kincaid should certainly be getting more targets will be my argument here, obviously. But
he looked good, though. This was another very encouraging game for him. I mean, the situation with him, I think, is similar to the situation with Cook, where if it's not a blowout, you're going to get more involvement. But your note about Cook getting the 5 targets within this context is a really good one, right? Because if he's going to out-target Keon Coleman 5-1, that's a very positive note for James Cook.
Yeah, if we can get a situation where the Bills are, trailing by 7 points, at some point, I think it'd be very good for both of those guys. But Kincaid does get the touchdown in this, and I feel like I was arguing James Cook's case. I have basically zero James Cook, but he is a player who I've been, looking at him and thinking he's in a pretty good situation now the rest of the way with how things have kicked off here. Ray Davis does get the touchdown, but it's very late in the game here as well. But Kincaid gets the touchdown at the back of the end zone, a play where Josh Allen has to scramble out, and it's kind of a scramble drill find with the back of the end zone. Good catch in there. So he gets the touchdown, has a 28-yard reception as well. You would again love to see him involved more, but I think that it's eventually the game scripts are going to fall in that direction. The one thing with the Buffalo Bills, I did see as well that they have scored on all 3 possessions on all 3 opening drives. Let me get this right. I can't make sense of this. Just we'll skip that stat. I can't make sense of what I've written down here. So I'll pass it along. But the Bills have been very efficient kicking these games off, and this was obviously a very high example of it where they just, blow them out straight away, where they head into this one and they kick it off, Shawn. Touchdown, 70 yards, 5-minute drive, touchdown, 65 yards, 5-minute drive again, touchdown again, 8 plays, 68 yards, touchdown again, 5 plays, 41 yards, 2-minute drive, touchdown again, 53-second drive, 64 yards. So they are getting vertical as well. So the Bills, I think, are very exciting. And if we can get some games where they're a little bit closer, we don't want Josh Allen turning the ball over, but that's something that he has done historically. If we can get some of those turnovers to, add to the fantasy value of the rest of the team, I think the Bills players we've talked about here are set up nicely.
One of the things that's really cool for the Bills, you mentioned they're scoring basically every possession. We're still early enough in the season, and some teams, just based on the vagaries of the schedule, are playing really weak opponents. Some teams are playing fairly strong opponents. You don't always know what that is. One of the excuses for Patrick Mahomes a week ago was that he's always had trouble with the Bengals defense. Maybe that's why they didn't pass very much, why he didn't throw for many yards. Then you watch Jayden Daniels eviscerate that same defense, and you're like, well, this again seems like a very bad sign actually for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, as opposed to a good sign for the Bengals. You think about the Bills, and they're going to face at some point some teams that are decent, and you're going to get a different dynamic. So we don't really know which teams could be that, peak Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, the Brady teams that were embarrassing everybody, the Peyton Manning 2013 Denver Broncos, Peyton Manning with the Colts on a number of occasions, your Aaron Rodgers types of teams that score almost every possession, your peak Drew Brees teams. We don't know that yet, but it's a very positive sign for the Bills that they could be that. They're in that conversation based on the start, whereas teams that are not scoring at all are going to have to dramatically change if they want to be any part of that conversation at any point along the way. I would note for kind of the gunslingers out there, the big time traders who don't care if they lose some trades and aren't going to be embarrassed to make mistakes. The Bills do have one of the harder remaining running back strengths of schedule. They have one of the most brutal playoff running back strengths of schedule. So this isn't a bad time to sell on James Cook because he scored well and because there could be some hurdles in the future. Just because there are hurdles or obstacles doesn't mean a guy is going to stop scoring. I certainly believe much more strongly in selling mediocre players who have benefited from a good schedule and are going to have a tough schedule in the future. The problem, Colm, is that we do build our draft plan with the idea that we're not going to draft too many mediocre players. So the guys that you have a chance to actually sell, if you're an OT listener, are more guys like James Cook. So anyway, throw that note in there again for the gunslingers.
For the gunslingers, Shawn, they do have the Ravens on the road and the Texans on the road coming up in these next 2 games in week 4 and week 5. So if we get a bounce back from the Texans, we get the Ravens putting up some points like they did against the Dallas Cowboys this week. Let's see what we get from the Buffalo Bills and how it affects those targets to Dalton Kincaid. Excited for that. You did get a chance, Shawn, to catch up on the Steelers game, the Giants game. You mentioned that you had some interesting notes on those. I know one of those is probably that you're very excited to see Malik Neighbors' performance. I think he's on his way to have one of those all-time rookie seasons at this particular point. But between the Steelers and the Giants, the floor is yours for those 2 games. Hit me with some of your key takeaways.
Yeah, we could probably go through the Giants-Browns fairly quickly. I have no idea what's happening there in Cleveland. We talk about some injuries. They had a lot of offensive linemen going down throughout the game. They came in allowing a huge amount of pressure. I mean, right from the get-go, Deshaun Watson is being swarmed. Now, one of the things that you see in a game like this is that he no longer appears to have the type of athleticism where he can benefit from these types of plays. You think back to kind of peak Deshaun Watson, and he's not a guy who would drop back and then throw lasers with uncanny accuracy, right? He's someone who visually it was different than a Russell Wilson. It wasn't the same type of like pure sandlot type of game. And yet Watson would need to extend plays, to have this ability to kind of loft the ball down the field to open receivers, and he could make those plays. And I say loft the ball down the field. We know that one of the things with him coming out is questions about, the ball velocity. I'm not sure what the ball tracking data shows currently, but with Watson, it was never the big arm combined with the ability to read defenses and to make those quick throws. It was an ability to have almost, and this was what he was compared to sort of coming out of college after the national championship, those types of things, this Michael Jordan-esque element where he was larger than life. He would dominate plays through a combination of athleticism and then processing accuracy as the plays developed. We don't get any of that from him now. We don't have the athleticism to make guys miss. Now, he does have one really nice run somewhat late in the game. He ends up with the 4 carries for 26 yards in terms of how those scrambles are noted. So it's not like it's down to absolute zero, but he's just not a good fit with anything they're trying to do, and they cannot block for him now. It's completely different than several years ago when the Browns had this elite offensive line. One of the notes that we had in the offseason when people are trying to decide, should it be Jerome Ford? Should it be Deontay Foreman? Should it be a sleeper back? Should you just take the risk on Nick Chubb? Was noting that there's no guarantee and probably a strong reason to believe the Browns will not have a strong running game in 2024. The pie will be small. You can make mistakes on some of those types of assessments, and yet that is what we're seeing. And in part, it's what we're seeing because they can't move the ball in any way, shape, or form. So the offense, they're broken. Now, Amari Cooper does draw the 12 targets. He had been very quiet through the first couple of weeks. Colm, I'm not sure what the outcome was with the injury he suffered late in the game. But Cooper, multiple ridiculous receptions on the sideline. He had a fantastic performance. I mean, Cooper is someone we tend to not like for fantasy, but I want to give people full credit when they have extraordinary reality games. He showed up in a huge way here, or the Browns would have been even more humiliated than they were. Now, having said that, they could have very easily won this game because the Giants' offense melted down in the second half. Daniel Jones, very controversial passer. He was fantastic outside of the pick that got wiped away by a penalty in the first half. He was fantastic through about the first 60% of this game, getting rid of the ball quickly, getting rid of the ball on target, moving the offense at will. You got a lot of dynamism from Devin Singletary early. You have Wan'Dale Robinson catching 7 of his 8 targets in this game and helping move the chains. Now, the target that wasn't completed was on a 3rd down late where he should have, he was open and he was going to get the first down. Daniel Jones missed him. Jones looked bad in the final third of this game. I think that's going to be discouraging for some people. You do like his combination, though, of release and mobility. I think that Daniel Jones is one of these guys who is still better than people are giving him credit for and has the chance now that he has a Malik Neighbors to be a viable reality QB and, especially in Superflex, a viable fantasy QB. There's a difference between viable and someone you're going to be that enthusiastic about starting. The other big note, I think, in this game, Colm, as we take a little bit longer view, I thought there were a lot of nice plays by Singletary in this game. He does have a 43-yard run, but he loses a fumble in a huge moment again. This would have been a blowout probably if he doesn't fumble. Tyrone Tracy actually pretty involved. I think if you're in Probably it's still early for a shallow league unless you have injuries, unless you just have roster spots available. But in medium leagues, in deep leagues, you definitely want to have Tyrone Tracy on your bench if you maybe released him after a couple of weeks because you've got to make some free agent pickups, and it's probably time to put him back on that roster.
Yeah, and I've been impressed, Shawn. Singletary was somebody I did target a little bit this offseason. I've been pretty impressed with him overall, but I also really like, the comment there on Tyrone Tracy, to keep an eye on him. But yeah, he also would have had that second touchdown if he hadn't went down at the 1 yard line as well. So the Giants getting the win on the road, the Cleveland Browns obviously taking the L. 3-0, Shawn, the Pittsburgh Steelers with Justin Fields. I thought this was Fields' best performance of those 3 contests. I think we're going to see him continue to be the starting quarterback for this team now. I feel like he has done nothing but continuous case as to why he should be starting. And I mentioned that they are still not letting him run the ball. They're trying to keep him kind of managing the game more so.
And one of the things that's been very clear with Justin Fields is that a lot of the problems in Chicago were not on him because he looks fantastic. This was easily the best game that I've seen Justin Fields play because the Los Angeles Chargers are a good defense. He was getting rid of the ball quickly. Now you can say that most of these targets are underneath, and that's going to be a lot easier, right? But when you think about Fields and the lack of conviction on where to throw the ball so often with the Bears and the sacks that stemmed from that, we haven't witnessed any of that with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what you're seeing right now is an elite athlete. The play where he scores the rushing touchdown, where he pulls the ball and runs it in, I mean, he just looks like he's operating at a different speed than everybody else. But the thing with him has always been fantastic accuracy. It's been processing and getting the ball out on time. We're now seeing that from him, which again, players get better. So that's one thing that's probably happening. And yet at the same time, what they were asking him to do in Chicago probably was one of the biggest contributing factors. But then you get back to the Steelers, and if they're actually scoring points, Cordarrelle Patterson got 5 targets in this game. He carries the ball 4 times. I don't know that it's necessarily his fault. The defender also gets his hand in there. The ball is probably thrown too hard. But, I mean, Patterson is the target on the pick, which is the one, truly bad play in this game for the Steelers. One of the things that I think you can look at a team and a coordinator and know that probably you shouldn't be hiring someone is if they go to a new team and they're bringing in guys like Cordarrelle Patterson and Gerald Everett because they have familiarity with the offense. I think if that's something that you can figure out in the interview, it's just a no thanks. The other thing here is just that these two teams, even though they're not explosive, look so well prepared compared to the vast majority of other teams. That was the thing that everyone was talking about with Harbaugh coming in with the Chargers. Just the overall amount of preparation, how the team would, really the entire organization, top to bottom, will be built, and the attention to detail. In this particular game, you had both quarterbacks completing almost every pass in the first half. You had Justin Herbert come out and look really, really good. Now, the game did turn. It was starting to turn clearly before the injury. Once Justin Herbert has the ankle issue, it becomes non-competitive. But this is, I think, still a very positive performance when you think about maybe not the short term, but the medium term for the Chargers. They're going to be a very, very good team. The AFC West will be interesting there. People have much more conflicting thoughts, I think, about Sean Payton and Bo Nix. There's no question about the Chiefs with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And now we have this second potential. I mean, obviously, we're many, many games and victories and years away from dynasty. But you think about what Harbaugh has built at the various stops that he has had. You think about him having a Justin Herbert. You think about what they're already doing on the lines. The Chargers are going to be here for a long, long time. And this Chiefs-Chargers impending rivalry, I think, is going to be one of the more fun ones to track over the next 5 to hopefully 10 years in the NFL.
So that is going to get us to the end of this edition. Hopefully people have enjoyed listening. And we will be doing some Dynasty-focused content on the Friday show. So make sure you are subscribed to get those shows once they're available on the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OverToMartin. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.